When the bomb went off in Oklahoma, I knew within the first few hours that somebody was lying. Because you know from evidence, from the architecture of the building, the asymmetry in the collapse of the building, the reach of the warhead was absolutely, totally incompatible with 4,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate and fuel oil, or ethanol. So my move was initially, within the first day or two, to get in contact with the senator from Oklahoma's office and try to keep that building from coming down. I knew because they were lying, they would try to cover it up, and they would bring the building down and bury it as quickly as they possibly could, to get rid of it, dispose of it. And so I went to Senator Nichols' office, and his assistant, who was handling things for Oklahoma, said he would check it out, see what he could do. I was trying to get him to get the Oklahoma National Guard to do an independent investigation. And 2 days later, he said, well, he talked to the people, and there's a lot of difference of opinion in Oklahoma with respect to what happened. And from that comment, I decided he was going to do nothing, so I turned out a technical report and sent it to 75 senators and congressmen who had very good voting records. And essentially, it was a black hole. Most of them sent the report to the FBI for their information and action. One senator wrote a letter back and said, I've withdrawn my report, my support for the counterterrorism bill, and we'll see to it that it is cleaned up before it gets through. But the reaction was pretty much like a black hole. As you know, they went ahead and took the building down and physically buried it. It was physically buried. Now, there's the Murrah building. This is the transfer beam. It goes across the front. The building is roughly 70 feet this way and 200 feet this way. The street is going slightly uphill, and in the middle of the building it is level with the sidewalk. Down here the first floor is above the sidewalk, and on this end of the building the floor is below the level of the sidewalk. And you have a little planter that goes across, all the way across the building from one end to the other. And that little planter is very flimsy. It's very little reinforcement in it. It's a planter wall. And I'll show you later the damage, and you see it's still standing, so there's a lot of phoniness about what had happened down there. If you look at the other side of the building, there wasn't an awful lot of damage. And I know the architect. I talked to the architect who was responsible for advising the shoring up crew about the building, and he had suggested that the people down there, they ought to really rebuild the building because it was rebuildable. You could tear a lot of it away, but a lot of it was still in very good shape. The elevator tower, and he said didn't have a crack on it. But he said the mayor of Oklahoma called him and said, it's my position that the building should be brought down as soon as possible, and I want you to back me up on it. And he said, by the way, that's the governor's position also. Team number 5 in the rescue operation put this sign on the building across the street, the Journal Records building, and said, we search for the truth. We seek justice. The courts require it. The victims cry for it. And God demands it. The courts require it as a lie. Absolute lie. They have participated in all kinds of cover-up. Now, Charles Key, when I saw what was happening, and I went to Senator Nichols' office, and they weren't going to do anything. I got the report out, I put a technical report out, and sent to 75 senators and congressmen, and it was almost a black hole. And then Charles Key had gotten a hold of that report, and he invited me down to Oklahoma, and to give my analysis of what had happened. And all the members of the Oklahoma Assembly were invited to attend. Only a few attended. All the family members, surviving family members, were invited to attend. Quite a few of them attended, and it was held in the assembly room of the state legislature. And while I was there, we went out and we looked at a lot of things, and Charles Key filed to get the effort to get the county grand jury underway because actually the governor vociferously opposed having the legislature, and he lobbied strongly against having the legislature look into it. And we had a press conference, and some government official there did his best to put words in the mouth which I hadn't said. He's trying to say, well, that Ben Partin says the government destroyed the building. I didn't say that. I said, we know who's covering it up, but we know who destroyed it. At that time, we did not. If you have a minimum amount, and when you implode a building, you use a minimum amount of explosive, because these are done in populated areas normally. And so what you do is you drill a hole into a column and put a little piece of explosive in there, less than, say, a pound or less or more, and you tamp it, and you run a squib in, and you connect them up with primacord or electronic timing, and you set them off in a sequence to make the building collapse the way you want it to. And it doesn't take very much explosive buried in the column, because the pressure when that explosive goes off is several hundred times the yield strength of the concrete. So it just turns an area around that explosive into dust and leaves a structure there with nothing but the rebar. You don't do anything to the rebar because it's embedded in the concrete, and when a wave of plastic deformation moves through, a wave of deformation through the concrete, it just turns it to dust, and you can blow it away. Now, when the building started imploding, all those little pieces of explosive in the columns, you see, you generate all that white dust, because the wave of deformation, it doesn't deform very easily. But when it moves through the rebar, the reinforcement rods, they're plastic. And if you want to tell what has happened to where a piece of rebar has been exposed to high explosive or high detonation velocity explosives, you can take and make a photomicrograph of it and see the grain changes in the rebar, and very easily determine what had happened. Now, as the building was being collapsed, you probably, with less than 200 pounds of explosive in all those little charges, you probably had several thousand pounds of that dust that was created. That's why you had some of the children and people in there, they were so laden, heavily laden with this dust, they're almost unrecognizable. The pressure from, say, we're out here where it had been 500 to 700,000 pounds per square inch where the explosive went off, by the time you got to the first point of contact of this column, the pressure would have been down to about 385, 90 pounds. And that's enough when you can load structures to get failure, but you cannot get the kind of failure which you call Broussard's failure, where the stuff turns to powder. You cannot get any of the Broussard's damage, but there's a lot of Broussard's damage in the building. So you know, there were demolition charges inside the building. Now, if you look here, you brought down this column over here where the pressures were, what, 30 pounds or so. You're talking about bicycle pressure, top pressures, bicycle tire pressures. Now, if you could just on the basis of logic, if you could take down this column and this column and this column, and you could reach out to here and take this column down, certainly you would have been able to take down all of these columns, which are much smaller. This column was about 36 inches by 22, with about 20 pieces of rebar, which were 1 3/4 inches in diameter. A massive, massive structure. And these were about 22 inches square back in here. So if you could have taken this column down, you should have taken all these down, but they're still standing. Secondly, if you could have taken this one out, you should have been able to take this one out. And you had about 40%, 42% more impulse here than you had here. This one came down and those are still standing. You can't have that kind of a symmetry because the pressure distribution is very, very symmetrical from that kind of a warhead going off. Now, you can do some things to focus explosive charges, but when you don't, with say a shape charge, you can put your copper liner on one side and get a focus beam and get energy to go out some distance. But when you just take explosives and try to shape them within 2 or 3 charge diameters, any directionality, most of the directionality is going to disappear. In at least 4 or 5 diameters, it'll disappear. Now, the Federal Emergency Management Administration, the people who will become your government if the President declares emergency, in conjunction with the American Society of Civil Engineers, turned out this report to try to refute the report that I had turned down. And they really muddle it up in a very bad way. It's a free report. Anybody wants to write to call FEMA, they'll send you this report. It's about over 1/4 inch thick, beautiful color all the way through. It's a propaganda piece. It's free. If it wasn't a propaganda piece, you'd have to pay for it. Now, if you look at what the trial was all about, Nichols, if you take, the FEMA report said to